Thank you, Phil. I appreciate it. Yeah, no pressure there then. So, my name's Aaron. I'm an alcoholic from Molalla, Oregon. Grateful to be here tonight. Whatever you guys are doing here on this Zoom meeting, you guys are killing it, because I was looking at the participants here. It's like I remember sitting in on conferences and in meetings during the pandemic, and they would just have a handful of people on them. So I really commend you guys for keeping this up. And thank you for the invite. Definitely, it's always an honor. I mean, I know it's overused, but an honor and a privilege to do service in Alcoholics Anonymous and be invited. But it truly is an honor and a privilege to do something like this on a Saturday night when we should all be out getting hammered somewhere. That's what we should be doing as alcoholics. But we're doing it, a different way of life. So I was looking up Kingston too. I've done a fair amount of work back there in Morristown, which I realize is not that far from you guys, which is pretty cool. So if I'm back there, I will definitely be rolling in and checking out a meeting. And that being said, yeah, I'd like to invite you guys. My home group is the Canby Saturday Breakfast Meeting. We meet at 9 a.m. on Saturdays, obviously, in Canby, Oregon, at Pappy's Greasy Spoon, and the food is as good as it sounds. And I would love to invite you guys out there. If you show up, I'll buy you breakfast. If you're out of town, I'd love to show you guys around too. Like I said, I'm native Oregonian, and I'm super proud of my state. I love it out here. So I've got a sponsor who knows he knows he's my sponsor, which is important. I work the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous with other new guys on a regular basis as much as I can. I hold an active service position, which I have at some level pretty much since the first 3 months that I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's what, and I've found a God of my own understanding. That being said, that is the most important thing, here tonight. I would not be here without a higher power, and Alcoholics Anonymous, without a doubt, you guys introduced me to a power greater than myself. So, and you'll hear a little bit about that in my story. I'm hoping tonight there's some newcomers out there. I always say I believe in the fifth tradition of Alcoholics Anonymous, that the only thing that I'm really doing here tonight is to pass the message to the alcoholic that still suffers. And there might only be one person out there tonight that needs to hear what I have to say. Only you are going to know who you are, and the rest of you can just kick back and have a cup of coffee and relax a little bit. So I like to read from page 124. That always gets me centered. When I came into Alcoholics Anonymous this last time, where I actually gave it a shot, I came in and I was pretty broken, and somebody read out of the big book, and I'd been dodging the book for years. You're never going to find me in that. I was all powerful, blah, blah, blah. And I came in and I was just broken enough, and thank God that somebody read out of the big book, and I felt like they were reading right to me. And so I like to start with that. And page 124, it took me a while to realize, because I might have stayed out there a little too long, that 124 is also my sobriety date. So it says, this painful past may be of infinite value to other families still struggling with their problem. We think each family which has been relieved owes something to those who have not. And when the occasion requires, each member of it should be only too willing to bring former mistakes, no matter how grievous, out of their hiding places. Showing others who suffer how we were given help is the very thing which makes life seem so worthwhile to us now. Cling to the thought that in God's hands, the dark past is the greatest possession you have, the key to life and happiness for others. With it, you can avert death and misery for them. And the key words in that to me is in God's hands, because in my hands, the dark past was that was it. It was a dark past, and it was secrets, and I didn't like anybody to know about it. And that kept me sick for a lot of years. And what you guys taught me in Alcoholics Anonymous is, my biggest curse could become my biggest blessing. And that's what's happened is I've been blessed to be able to use that past and be able to help other alcoholics. And I never thought that would be possible. I just buried my past for years, and it kept me out there drinking for a lot of years. I drank. One of those guys, I started out drinking, I had a blast. I'm not going to say I was, it was all misery, and I drank because I like to drink. I like the effects of alcohol, and I like to get drunk, I was one of those kids that, I lived at 120 miles an hour. That was my life. So, um, that's just, my story. So and I created a lot of wreckage. So, I'll go back to a little bit about how I grew up. I grew up in a tiny little town here in Oregon called Eddyville. And if you haven't heard of that town, nobody in Oregon has either. It's just a little bump in the road. See, I see Kyle on here from Portland, and and sorry for the diss on Portland earlier there, Kyle. But yeah, it's just a little bump in the road. I graduated with 19 kids in my class, pretty much the same 19 that I started school with. It was my dad was a reforestation contractor back when that was the big booming business out here in the 70s. And I grew up around a lot of alcohol. My grandpa was head of sales for Olympia Brewing Company back when that was the big beer out here. And we had Olympia everything. I always said we had 30 acres, lived out literally in the hills. And we had, this will tell you a little bit in a snapshot. We had the back end of an Olympia beer truck was my dad's storage shed. And usually there was some sort of animal hanging in, let's say, basically every day was hunting season where I grew up. And, that's just way we lived. It wasn't, my dad didn't go out and poach deers. It was just, that was it. I got a buddy that always says it was kind of like Dukes of Hazzard on speed. That's how I grew up. And so, but yeah, alcohol was always around. My grandpa was a hard drinker. My dad was a hard drinker. My mom was a hard drinker, but they were functioning alcoholics. They didn't miss a lot of work. My grandpa used to say, I've never missed a work, I'm not an alcoholic. I never missed a day of work due to drinking, but he worked in a distribution center for alcohol. His job, they used to tap kegs out on the floor, and the drivers would talk about, well, we only used to have, a beer or two between stops. So that's the way it was. When your job is to drink, it's hard to miss a day because of drinking. But so alcohol was always around me. I'm not a kid. I remember taking my first drink of whiskey at probably 4 or 5 years old. I didn't by any means, I remember it, but I don't remember, I didn't start drinking at 4 or 5, let's put it that way. I started drinking on a regular basis around the age of 15. I lived with my mom. My mom moved back to South Dakota. My parents divorced when I was 13. Lived with my mom for a year, and my school really tanked, and it was Rapid City was definitely bigger than Eddyville. So I moved back with my dad, and, single dad, he was doing his, work, gone a lot of the time. So I started drinking a lot on the weekends. And from the time that I started, the big book talks about, the problem drinker, when you might have maybe you get a DUI or problems with your wife or whatever it is, the hard drinker. And that person can go, if there's enough consequences or a consequence, he might just say, hey, that's it, I've had enough. And I think I blew past that in my drinking, because I drank alcoholically from the time I started drinking. My deal was, to this day, if I pick up a beer or a shot of whiskey or whatever it is, I don't know when I'm going to stop, and it says we agnostic. It talks about that a little bit, in the very first paragraph there, it talks about, if we know when we're going to stop, basically, once we pick up. And I didn't. Have I ever tried on my own to quit drinking and been successful? No. So right there, I don't need a 30-question pamphlet from a treatment center to say whether I drank alone or if I've had problems. Those 2 questions right there identifies me as an alcoholic. I might be able to have 3 beers, I might be able to have 30. I just don't know. So like I said, I had a lot of fun early on, and I'd end up in what we called Saturday school. My coach would say, you end up in Saturday school because you missed too much Monday school. That was kind of the mantra for me. But I was a kid, I never got suspended from school. I got along with everybody, the kids I grew up with, they were pretty much like family to me. We didn't have not a lot. We didn't have any police where I grew up. So it was a logging community. So 17 years old, I graduated from high school. I was the youngest one in my class. So I went right into, I fought wildfires for my first summer. And then I went right into high lead logging. So, and that was the big booming timber industry out here in that time. And that was work, that was real work. And I busted my butt and moved over to the big city of Philomath. That was about 5,000 people at the time, and they had police officers. And that's when I first started kind of getting in trouble with the law. I drank. It's hard. There was no consequences in my vocabulary. Let's put it that. I would walk down Main Street drinking a beer, drank everywhere I went. My excuse was I work like a man, I do man's work, and I can drink like, and they'd be like, that's great. I'm writing you up for minor in possession. And so I had a DUI by the time I was 18 years old. Doesn't make me an alcoholic, just shows you just how I drank. And had a DUI 18. And that's where I was first introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I remember the meeting to this day. It was a Wednesday or Thursday, and in that little town of Philomath. And I walked in there, and I remember the topic. It was Serenity. I knew nothing about what Serenity was. And I remember getting around to this lady, and she was old. She was probably 45, at the time. And so I was like, and she said, my idea of Serenity is I just stay home on a Friday night and I pet my cat. And I'm like, this stuff is just not for me, right? This is not where I'm at in my life. So it was like, that was my introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous. And from there, I realized I could sign my own court slips. I had my buddies sign my court slips, and I just kept ripping and running, and having a blast. And I was married and divorced by the age of 20. I had a son, and I just basically, and I'm not proud of this. I basically just turned. My wife left me. She didn't want to, saw real soon how alcohol was just her dad was an alcoholic, and I just, hiding alcohol, though, everything we do. And I just turned around, basically walked out on my family, walked out on my son. And I got into some other extracurricular activities. Like I said, I worked as a logger, long, hard days. So by the weekend, I was exhausted. So I found something that could keep me going a little bit farther through the weekend. And basically it was something that could keep me wide awake, drunk. And I love being drunk, and I didn't want to crash for the weekend. So I just, kind of extended the party. And that really accelerated my my trouble with the law. Accelerated my alcoholism is what it did. I ended up in treatment center after treatment center. Say I do it by the numbers. I turned 22. I was in on house arrest by certain charges. 23, I was in jail, different charges. And my 24th birthday, I was in one of the second biggest prison here in Oregon. And this was a kid that, never was suspended from high school. It's just the way that I drank and everywhere it took me. I like to say I partied like a rock star minus the talent. And that's the way it was. And so to the point where it was is I'd been released from jail on a 6-month sentence. I remember I had a suspended prison sentence hanging over my head. And this just goes to show like where I was at this point. I was 23 at that time, and I think I was looking at 19 to 24 months, and I reoffended on something. And my dad, there was nobody in my corner at this point. I remember my dad asking my attorney if he could come speak on my behalf, and of course my attorney is more than happy to have somebody come to speak on my behalf. So we went before the judge, and I remember my dad saying, my son has a serious problem, and he's a danger to himself, and he's a danger to society, and please give him the maximum sentence that you can give him. And I remember, it seems funny now. At the time, it wasn't funny. It really wasn't funny. And so they handed down the sentence, and I ended up going into a prison boot camp. I got a pretty good share of time, some time knocked off my sentence. That's what it was for. It was 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, physical training, the drug and alcohol classes. It was ran by military, just like military. And I did really well at that. And so during that time, I think I was like one of 23 or 24 out of 63 that graduated in my platoon. people opted out to go back to prison. I mean, it wasn't the easiest thing, but the way I grew up, just the work ethic, I really wanted to go through that. So at that point, my best thinking is I'm going to get a hold of my aunt and move up to the Portland area because I want to get away from the drugs and alcohol. So, I moved from a city of 5,000 up to, I think at that time there was about 500,000. So still not the best thinking process. And she let me come stay with her for what she says was 3 months. And it turned out to be, I was there 3.5 years later. I had enrolled in college. I was going to be a police officer. I go from, straight out of prison. I'm going to get a job as a cop because I think the big book calls it delusional. And so I enrolled in school. I wasn't drinking when I first moved up here. But I went out to a company party and they had microbrews, still the big thing here in Portland. And I was weaned on Olympia and hams. And I thought, well, maybe microbrews, maybe that's just going to be a little bit different. And that became the story of my life. The one more attempt and one more failure. Tried the microbrews and there it was, and it starts the cycle again. And I thought the other stuff was my problem, but then the alcohol, it just accelerated. So like I said, 3.5 years later, I'm still working on that 2-year degree, and my aunt says, Aaron, I think we've done enough here that we can't help you anymore. And my aunt, I mean, my uncle's a local musician. He's kind of like a local legend up here, and it's not like they're ixnay on the alcohol. I mean, I was partying right, and they're just like, this is it. So from there, I had trouble finding work. I had a criminal background, and I was trying to be honest. That's what they told me in boot camp, was mark yes on the employment application when they asked about the criminal background. And once you got in there for the interview, kind of explain yourself. And my deal was I never got in for an interview. So long story short, my friend up here, he has a great union job. He says, come on out here, just mark no on the application. They're not very strict on the background checks. I thought it's worth a shot. And sure enough, they had to have done no background check, and I get in for that job. At that point, once again, I'm trying to sober up a little bit. I passed the UA, get in there, and so where I'm going, alcohol might be kind of an issue, but I'm toying around, trying to sober up a little on my own here and there, but not taking it super serious. And I work swing shift with a bunch of union guys. So anybody that's union or works in, and we get off at 12:30, and right across the street, there's 3 bars, and they'd stay open for us and serve us right up until last call. The guys go over there to drink. Now, the difference is they go over and drink. 90% of them can go home and, come to work the next day. But me, I'm just getting started. Nobody ever understood that. I'd be gone the next day, maybe the next day, maybe the next day after that. Because of the union, there was a fairly lenient attendance policy. So I was like, I abused the heck out of that. But it got to the point where I got sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I just couldn't, I was trying to not drink, and I was trying to not miss work, and it just kept happening over and over again. And alcohol was starting to get its hooks into me pretty good. And, I always said when I was younger, when the fun ran out, when I wasn't having a good time, that didn't mean the consequences, any of that. Even when I was going back and forth to jail, alcohol was still working for me. I thought, well, if it ever runs out and I'm not having a good time, I'm just going to call it quits and put the plug in the jug, right? So that's what I was saying. I kind of overshot that mark, where if there was ever a point where I was a problem drinker or a hard drinker, I overshot that and missed all the consequences, and ended up right as the real alcoholic. And when I was ready to quit, I just couldn't. Alcohol had its hooks in me, and it would be one more attempt, one more failure, and one more attempt and one more failure. And it was just that way. And I finally went up to the general manager, and I said, hey, and I was trying to save my job. I was right on the cusp of being fired. And I also was just, getting sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I told him, I pulled out my attendance. I said, every time that I miss work here, it's because of alcohol. And I've got a problem and I need to address it. And so they let me go to outpatient treatment program. And from there, things start picking up. I'm going to some AA meetings. I'm not participating. I'm not working AA. I'm kind of sitting in the back, but I'm seeing it's working for you guys, but I'm not going to pick up the big book or do anything that you suggest. It's just enough that I'm going to sit there and catch this thing by osmosis, I think. And so I sat around and I put together some decent sobriety. Guess what? My attendance goes to stellar employee. At that time, there's a young lady by the name of Megan that starts working at our warehouse, and beautiful. I always say, there's 300 guys working in the warehouse and there's like 5 women. They're all beautiful, of course, but she was really beautiful. It's kind of like working in a prison, right? Every girl that walks by is like, oh, she's really good looking, but she was very angelic looking, long blonde hair, pale, like the light complected skin. And she ended up, she was an auditor, and she came down and she ended up talking to me, and we're talking back and forth. Turns out her dad was kind of like a bulldog once I finally saw him, and he worked at the other end, but he worked other end of the warehouse, huge warehouse. And I didn't know him. He worked graveyard, and he had told everybody there, nobody is going to talk to my daughter. Nobody's going to date my daughter. I didn't get the memo down at my end of the warehouse. So we end up going out, and the relationship took off from there. And I was honest with, I was sober at the time, and she fell in love with me sober, and I fell in love with her while I was sober. And early on, I told her, here's the deal. I have a serious drinking problem. And I was honest at that point. If I ever start drinking, you're just going to have to leave me. It's as simple as that, because I'm not a good guy. It's going to be a totally different person then. And long story short, about 9 or 10 months, I went to visit a friend of mine in South Dakota. The only thing I knew about having a good time with him is drinking. And I sat there and I remember thinking that drink through, for probably a half hour. And he's telling me, you don't have to drink, we're sitting at the bar, and I'm like, nah, I'm thinking about it. And you guys know, once that thought kicks in, I have no mental defense against the first drink, and it becomes an obsession, and I start obsessing over it. And I'm not going to start, if I have no defense against that, I'm going to obsess over that drink until I drink. And once I drink, it lights the, or the doctor's opinion where it says I have an allergy, right? And I feed that allergy. And then it's like, I tell people it's like being hungry and I can't get enough food, right? I can't get enough drink in me. I ended up blacking out that night, waking up, have no idea how I got where I was. And if I drank tonight, after 15 years of sobriety, my sobriety day is January 24th, 2007. I don't think I mentioned that. If I drink tonight, it's going to be the same way. I haven't learned anything that's going to keep me sober or maintain my drinking. That experiment is over. I've tried just about everything there was to maintain my drinking, to minimize it, and it just didn't work. So I remember coming back, and I was being honest. I was honest with Megan, and I told her I drank while I was back in South Dakota. And I remember her crying, just breaking down. It was like she knew something that I didn't know, and she saw something that I didn't see. And from there, what that did as an alcoholic is she didn't leave. And what that did for me is it opened up that door where, okay, I know now I have it. It's okay for me if I go out and slip up, right? If I have a slip, which I hate that word, I call it a choice these days. I have a choice whether I go drink or not. And it went on like that for several years. I would drink, I would get some sobriety. Her dad, mom never saw in me what she saw in me. They just didn't, because most of the time I was drunk, and another DUI, breathalyzer, the whole thing. I would hide alcohol all over the house. I would have it hidden outside. I'd go to walk my dog so I could drink booze that was out in the brush. I'm like, healthiest dog I've ever had, right? It was always going on walks. And so my dogs now could only be so lucky, but it was everything I could do to keep drinking, and there was times where she was on the borderline of leaving. I remember my mom was in poor health. She had multiple sclerosis. She came out to live with us, and one night, Megan, I just stayed out all night. My son, she was the one that reconnected my relationship with him. Don't you want to have a relationship with him? And I'd been around my son. I say I'd show up what I called like photo ops. You'd see me at his birthday or maybe in a Christmas picture, like it looked like I might have been a part of his life, but I really wasn't. And she was the one that got me reestablished with him, and he'd come up and visit, and I just couldn't quit drinking. Sometimes I'd be sober there, and then there was other times, like I remember the night, I just didn't come home. And Megan had never met my son's mom. She had to drive him back down to where he's from in Corvallis and meet my son's mom and just tell her that I never came home. Not that it would surprise her that much, but that's just what kind of father I was. And I would drink again out of guilt and shame. And but yeah, Megan packed up her stuff one night, and I remember she took her stuff to her dad's, and her dad told her he's not an alcoholic, but his favorite uncle had died of alcoholism, drank himself to death. And he says, here's what I can tell you, Megan. He said, from what I can see, Aaron's an alcoholic, and you're not going to change him. He's only going to change when he wants to change, or when he needs to change. And so you can live with him or you can leave him. So you love him or you leave him, but you make the choice, because I'm not going to be that dad that drives you back and forth every weekend. It's going to be your choice. And she chose to stay with me. And there was times that I would pull it together and be sober enough to do something. The proposal, I finally proposed to her after 4 or 5 years, and I was sober during that time, and it was a good proposal. And she would always see those glimpses, like I'm sure a lot of our spouses have. The glimpses of me when I was sober was not the person. That was the person she loved, and she would get the glimpses enough to keep hanging on. And she was the first woman in my life that checked into Al-Anon, and God bless any Al-Anons are out there. I always say, I'm sober because of Al-Anons, and I'm sober because of my mother's prayers. And that's for sure. So she checked into that, and she just kept reaching for the person that I was. And we ended up getting married in 2006. My son came up to live with us, and he was having some issues with his mom, starting to get into drinking on his own, and just following in my footsteps. So the one thing there's a lot I can say about Megan is she treated my son very well, a great stepmom, a great role model. Her family is one of those tight knit, just salt of the earth, working class. I always call them, they're kind of hillbilly, but they're just a great family. And they took him in and treated him like one of their own. And meanwhile, I'm just battling this alcohol back and forth. And we got married September 16th, 2006. And that whole year I was just miserable. I was drinking through our wedding. And I kept trying to just sober up, and I just couldn't. And I put together about 15 days right around Christmas and going into New Year's, because I always say holidays to me are no different drinking than any other day. People go, oh, it was really tough for me coming around the holidays. I'm like, I drank like it was New Year's pretty much every day that I ever drank. So it's no different to me. But I made it through the holidays, and I made it, and I set a what New Year's resolutions, and I remember at the very top of it, I put do not drink. And under that, I put be a better father, be a better son, be a better husband, be a better friend. I just wanted, at the end of the day, I just wanted to be a better man, because I knew my wife deserved it. I knew my son deserved it. I knew my mom, she was in, care facility. She needed me. And that was it. I bounced around AA a little bit again, and never participated. I always say, people that say Alcoholics Anonymous didn't work. It didn't work for me. I'm like, you haven't done Alcoholics Anonymous until you've done the 12 steps, and that is the deal. My buddy always says, this is a 12-step program. And it is not a going to meetings program. The meetings are great. The campouts are great. The roundups are great, but Alcoholics Anonymous is one alcoholic helping another and working the steps out of the big book. And that's just what worked for me when I finally got sober. But I'm running on my own will, my own power, still haven't given in. And January 1st, I write all that stuff down. January 5th, I take my son to a concert downtown Portland, and I get pulled over and get a DUI with my 16-year-old son in the car. My brother-in-law is a Portland police officer. You know, he's down at the precinct. I'm asking for him, probably one of his proudest moments on the job. You know, his brother-in-law's back there in the drunk tank, and he wouldn't come back and see me. What he did is he sent an officer back and he said, yeah, Joe's out there. He said, you're his brother-in-law. Said, you have a serious drinking problem and you need help. And that's the only message I got. And so from there, you know, rock bottom, incomprehensible demoralization kept me sober for another 2 weeks. Till I'm driving home and my car is like on automatic pilot. I'm coming home from work, and without even thought, you know, my sponsor always talks about, you know, treatment centers, and if this works for you, great. But they always say you play the tape all the way through. I'm an alcoholic of the type when that drink hits my mind, that's all I think about. You know, my brother would say it was like a hamster on the wheel. That's all I will think about until I take that drink. And sometimes where they talk about the strange mental blank spot, that's what it was driving home that night. And it's like I end up in the store getting beer. You know, always starts out with one, you know, 20 years of drinking, and I think it's the 24 ounces for the ride home. And it never ends at that. So 5 days later, I'm in and out of blackouts. My in-laws came over, tried to get me to go to work, talk to me for probably 5 or 6 hours during the morning. They're cooking for me, and I'm sneaking back and taking swigs of whiskey, and I just won't go to work. You know, I can't make it. I remember her, Megan's dad, leaving there after they had talked to me for several hours. And I just remember his head hanging low, and he looked like a father that was defeated. And I remember my mother-in-law turning around, and that look of disgust I'll never forget, of this is who my daughter married. You know, this is what she got for her life. And I went on, I promised them I was going to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous that day. Once they left, I could not get to the store fast enough to get more booze in my system. You know, I just couldn't. And but something happened. There was something that happened in the next 2 days. Megan went to stay at her parents' house, and for some reason I got through to her on the phone, where I'm like, just please come home, I need to talk to you. And she came home, and I wanted to talk to her about my drinking problem. And so I'm trying to feed her beers so we can be on the same, and she's not having any of it. And but I broke down. I just broke down in tears that night. And it was the first time that I honestly, I think, was honest with myself. And I just said, I just can't do this. You know, I have a problem and I need help. And I don't know what time she went to sleep. I remember leaving her a note on the bathroom counter, and it said, you know, Megan, I'm sorry for letting you down as your husband, and I'm sorry for letting your family down. And if you stay home with me today, I'll go to some meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous with you. And I told her I loved her, and she's a contributing member of society, and you know, she'd done the Al-Anon thing. So I get up, and she'd gone to work like a normal person would. She's not going to stay babysit me and take me to Alcoholics Anonymous. But what I did different was, as I got up, and there's a noon meeting about 10 miles away, and I drove myself in there, and I still go by this house, a little Buena Vista house is what it was, and just this little shack on the edge of a porch. And I walked up those steps, and I opened that door, and my life changed. You know, and I can, this is what happened. This is the what happened part of my story. Somebody read out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they read, but what about the real alcoholic? You know, this is the guy that's been puzzling you, the Dr. Heckle, the Mr. Hyde, or the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you know, building your life up and tearing it down, and alcohol hidden all over the house. And I'm like, they're reading to me, you know, this is me. And that was, really, it was, everybody was welcoming, but it was like I had to buy this book. I just, like, there's something in there. And I went and I bought 2 of them, one for me and one for my wife's family. So I literally had to drive right by their house on the way home, and I stop in and I apologized to my mom, you know, my mother-in-law, and it's still all about me. And I hand her the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm like, read this, because you might learn a little bit about my situation, why I've been doing all this. So still self-centered, you know, self will run right. But what I did differently is I went home, and I I didn't ask anybody what page that was on, and I dug through that thing until I found that. And I kept reading, and I kept reading, and I found myself on every single page in there. And that got me wound up on Alcoholics Anonymous, and I kept going back to that noon meeting, and you guys gave me hope. I mean, it really was. It was like, I remember the windows being open, and we don't get a lot of sunshine here in January. And I remember that week, it was just pure sunshine. And I remember them, the last days of my drinking where the blinds were shut, I was in there by myself. And like my brother said, I drank to be free. And by drinking, I created my own prison. And I remember sitting in those meetings. It was like the first time I'd seen the sun in years, and just the hope, the laughter, and it kept me coming back. And what I did is I became accountable for anybody that's new. That was the deal, is I got the group to know me. When they asked, is there anybody here in their first 30 days of sobriety, I would raise my hand and say, my name's Aaron, I'm an alcoholic, every single day. And I thought, these people think I'm drinking every night. I think, but I wouldn't, there was no disclaimer. They just say, is there anybody here in their first 30 days? So I was like, man, this is the longest 30 days of my life. In the meantime, I go to the Canby Saturday breakfast meeting, and I'm literally looking through the meeting schedule, and I'm like, well, these people can all afford breakfast. They got to be doing better than I am right now. So I went in there, and just and it's still this way. It's just an electric meeting. You go in there, and it's like, it's loud, and there's laughter, and just, I'm like, this is nothing like I thought Alcoholics Anonymous was. I thought that Alcoholics Anonymous was, after even years of bouncing around, everybody kind of, what I heard, because I wasn't ready to hear the message, was, oh, blah, blah, blah. I really wish I could drink. I had a really hard time not drinking today. And then everybody would go their separate ways, and then come back at noon the next day and complain again, and then go their side. I didn't realize these guys were living life, and what I heard, especially in that breakfast meeting, is people that were traveling the world together, scuba diving, climbing mountains, going to sporting events, and I was like, man, this is not what I thought, and it was definitely that attraction, not promotion. It was like, it lit a fire for me. So we go to the steps, right? And I'm looking at those steps, and I thought, when I look back on it, I worked that first step for 20 years. I didn't put a lot of pen to paper when I started working with my sponsor, because I knew my life was unmanageable. I was powerless over alcohol. What I came in, the second step, I believe, is when I walked up the steps into that meeting, and I was honest and open and willing with myself, that I had an open heart and an open mind to go, you know what, these people talk about God a lot. And I came to believe. That doesn't mean I instantly believed in a power greater than myself. I came in here and I was willing. And about 3 weeks in, and I use this with permission, there's a man by the name of Ron H., and he's a member of my home group. And I just talked to him this morning, and I always say he's the North Star of my program. He's not my sponsor, but he was, I'm questioning this whole God thing. And I hear him share, and he had, I think, 21 years of sobriety. It happened to hit his birthday. And he had been in a drunk driving crash where he was the driver, and a mother and her 2 young children died in that crash. And he had done 8 years in the Oregon State Penitentiary. And what I heard was him sharing, and he's a very humble man. And I didn't hear to what he said. It wasn't like, look what I've done with my life. What I heard was the feedback of the others. And people talked about, he worked in a women's treatment facility. The reason he worked there was because his victim, it was a women's treatment facility for mothers and their children. And he's been working there for 20 years because his victim was a mother and her children. And he carries a letter of forgiveness from the victim's family. And he talks about when he was in the penitentiary, and anybody that does H&I, they brought meetings in from the outside. And there was a guy that also had a manslaughter charge by the name of Chicago John, and he pulled Ron aside after the meeting. He says, Ron, he goes, you can't unring the bell, but you never have to ring it again. And when Ron shared that, I was like, man. And I say this from what I heard early on, and Ron nailed it for me, is it's hard to see the big picture when you're living inside the frame. And I thought maybe maybe there is something to this. It's like, I looked what Ron did with his life and going through this tragedy. And maybe if there's a God up there, there's just a bigger picture than I'll ever comprehend. And that was enough. And it talks about it in the 12 and 12, where you have that little crack of willingness to believe in God. And he kicked that door wide open for me. And I went home once again. I grabbed the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and I read through there until I find a simple prayer, and it was, thy will, not mine, be done. And from there, when I look back on it, that was me doing my third step. And I heard in here, prayer works better when you hit your knees. And I started hitting my knees every night. And that was about 3 weeks in. And it just, I can't explain what happened to me in that first 30 days. And that's why I like to really try to reach out to the newcomer and go, it doesn't take years sometimes for your life to change. You can hear something early on that just, it just changes it. And I remember I'm sitting there in the breakfast meeting, nothing against the plastic coins or anything, but they give you, I took a 24-hour chip there too, and they give you the nice solid, the metal coins. And I had that 24-hour coin, and I'm at work, and I work swing shift, and it's my 29th day. I cannot wait to get that 30-day coin because I'm so sick of raising my hand and saying I'm in my first 30 days. And I remember pulling up on a place, and like our warehouse is hundreds of thousands of square feet. I mean, it's huge. And I remember finding the spot, and I pulled that coin out, and it was after midnight, and I just reflected. Now I know what that is, kind of a meditation. And I thought how different my life was in the last 30 days, and what happened that night is I went home. It was I was working overtime, so I got home about 1:30 or 2 in the morning, and I walked into the bedroom, and I grabbed Megan, and she wasn't breathing, and I freaked out, and I rolled her over, still wasn't breathing. I had to call 911. I'd never had to call 911 in my whole life, and they got me, and they walked me through doing CPR on her, and they asked if there was anybody there that they could call, and I said, call her dad. And I gave them the phone number, and I'm doing CPR on her until the paramedics got there. And they came in and they pushed me out in the kitchen. And some people will say, yeah, this feels like it took, a year. They were back there for just a couple minutes. They said, sir, can we talk to you in the other room? And I knew right then she was gone, and what had happened. And she had had an epileptic seizure in her sleep. She wasn't a drinker. She wasn't a drug user. She had epilepsy, and she had had 4 or 5 seizures in her whole life. And they always said they weren't deadly, but this one was. And her dad showed up there, and he came walking through the door, and he thought it was just a routine seizure. They always said, just let her have the seizure. I said, Martin, she didn't make it. And he pushed by me, and I remember the paramedics grabbing him, and he just hit his knees on the floor, and he just let out this scream. And I heard the sound of a father's heartbreak that night. And I never wanted, it was the worst sound of pain I've ever heard in my life. And I knew right then it was, I thought that night, and we're in shock, I couldn't sleep, and I'm rolling all this stuff. I'm 30 days sober, right? And I'm rolling this stuff through my head on what I'd heard in here, and the power of the story of Ron and all this stuff, and thy will, not mine, be done. And I thought, if Megan knew I knew how important this was to her. And if I'm on my way, and if I'm believing this stuff with all my heart, then I got to think, thy will, not mine, be done. And I had to cling to that, because I would have fell apart. And the next day, of course, I don't make it to that meeting. I don't get my 30-day coin because we're all in shock. But what happened Saturday, that was Thursday night, rolling into Friday morning, would have been my 30-day at the noon meeting. Saturday morning, I'm sleeping out on the living room floor because I can't even go back in the bedroom. And my front door opens up, and Megan's dad comes walking through, and he said, this is the last thing I promised my daughter, to get you to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous this morning, and you're going to get up and you're going to go. I'll tell you right now, I wasn't jumping up and wanting to go. And what had happened is, she was supposed to drive me on Saturday. The night that she passed away, she said, Dad, I found out I got to work some overtime on Saturday. Can you get Aaron to this meeting? And that father remembered that. through everything that he had just gone through and losing his daughter, I wasn't son-in-law of the year. He'll tell you guys to this day that he hated me, and it was one promise. And we went in there and we both lost it to you guys, and you guys let him share. And he said he was fulfilling a promise, right? And I went up, and that's where I got my 30-day coin. And this guy that I don't know from Adam, Gary, he gives me a hug and he says, keep coming back. And I remember this guy standing up by the name of Steve Little, and he said, this is Alcoholics Anonymous. When one of us hurts, we all hurt. And that stuck with me, and it just hit me in the heart. And you guys, I mean, this is you surrounded me and my father-in-law and gave us numbers and talked to us for at least an hour afterwards. And I look back and I reflect on that day. And those guys that surrounded us are either sober to this day or they died sober. And the reason behind that is because they were reaching out to the alcoholic that still suffered, that was suffering, and they were working the 12-step of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's what I love about my home group. There's times where you hear a lot about the 12 steps, but then you watch people out in public and I'm like, well, they're not really, I like that there's a living sermon. I'd rather see a sermon than hear one any day, right? And those people surrounded us. And that man, Martin, he drove me to that meeting every Saturday for the next 3 years. And we bonded, we healed. It was like you guys were like a Netflix series, right? Couldn't wait to go back next week and see what happened to this guy. This guy made us laugh, and is this guy still alive? They talk, and it was just so powerful. And me and him, we bonded to this day. I tell him, Martin, you're not like a father to me, you are a father to me. And he invites me over. I've sat at his Christmas table with his family every Christmas for the last 15 years since I've been sober. And I feel like I owe it to that family. I fill a seat there. And he says, you're my son. You never knock on my door. You knock on my door, I'll laugh at you, and we've healed through this. I just, I can't, already, I always get into this and I'm like, I tell the what happened, and it's like, I cannot describe to anybody that's new or been around for a long time how different my life is from working the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, what you guys have given me, the job that, and all that, I still had the DUI to deal with. I had all that stuff that you come in whining and crying, my life's over, my wife, whatever. It was so secondary from what I was going through. And I was clinging, what it was, is I was clinging to that God that you guys introduced me to. And to this day, I keep my prayers very simple. I don't pray. I pray for what the will of God is for me today, and give me that knowledge, because I'm a little dense sometimes, and give me the power to carry that out, but I've got to do some amazing things. A little touching on the job. I went from being the employee, I was suspended over 30 times because of attendance. They made me foreman of the crew there. I made employee of the year out of 300 guys. And after about 2.5 years of sobriety, they terminated my employment for falsifying my application in 1999. I was terminated in 2009. But that gave me the opportunity. I remember whining and crying about that a little bit in meetings. And my buddy Gary, who's now one of my best friends, that gave me that 30-day coin. He said, you've been through way worse things at way worse times. And what did you do? You prayed on it, and God was good to you. And I got this job. I went to work for half of my wage, and they saw that I showed up. It was for an old boss of mine. He wasn't sure about hiring me. My father-in-law says he's a different man than he used to be. He hired me for 2 weeks, and I've been there since 2009. And they worked my way up into management, and that's how I ended up back in Morristown, Tennessee. We went back there. We opened a brand new distribution center back there, and they'd fly me out there to help with that. And to some of you that travel or have traveled for work, that might not be a big deal. For the guy that couldn't even make it out of bed to go to work or would have to drink just to get there, that is a huge deal. And you guys gave me that, through the year, I've stood on Mount Hood, the biggest, the tallest mountain here in Oregon. And I took up there with me, I took some of my wife's ashes at the very top, and I sit there and I thank God and I thank Alcoholics Anonymous. And I take those ashes and I spread them to the wind. And you guys gave me that. Been there for the birth of my 2 grandchildren. I have a great relationship with my son today. I've made amends. I'm good with my family. I have their trust. As I'm wrapping up here, I like to, for one, I want to read a letter very quickly from the courts. And this isn't, this was nothing to do with me. This is all you. And I always read it as a thank you. This is more, I was 2 years sober and I was going through this intensive supervision program still. It was lie detector tests. I had to sell my vehicle. They did this so I could just keep my job after Megan passed away. And so I go out to the mailbox and it's from the circuit court of the state of Oregon. I'm like, oh my God, I've been dotting my I's and crossing my T's. And I'm like, these are never good though. And I open it up and it says, "Dear Mr. Zyback, Mr. Wiedenhofer forwarded me a copy of the email you sent of January 22nd, indicating you will mark 2 years of sobriety on January 24th, 2009. I did not want to miss this opportunity to participate in congratulating you on your success this far. You made an impact on me when you started DISP. The loss of your wife was tragic and you had many burdens to bear. As far as I can see, you have risen to this challenge beautifully. You have shown a commitment to your sobriety and the health of you and your family that I hope you feel serves you well. I believe it does. It is always easy to do well when life goes our way. The true test of character and commitment comes when life asks more of us than we expected. You have demonstrated an ability to stay centered in the midst of chaos and have moved through it to, I hope, a place of peace. May your higher power watch over you and your family as you continue through to a successful completion of DISP and a joyous free life. Best wishes, Kathleen M. Daly, Circuit Court Judge." And I know that wasn't a chain letter, and that lady is one of my biggest fans to this day. And, I can't thank her enough. I can't thank Alcoholics Anonymous enough. But the biggest gift that I've received, and I heard this, I'll close with this. It was my mom had been sick with MS for years, but the last several years just clear as a bell. She was in a care facility. That's where I met my ex-wife. Actually, I got married after this, but that's a whole other story. We're still great friends, and she's a nurse there. But one of the biggest gifts I got was to go in there all the time. It was only about a mile from my house, and I'd spend time down there. And I always say I would love to. I'd go in there and I'd give my mom grief and make her just belly laugh, right? I'm like, it doesn't get any better than that for me, the legitimate laughs that we get to give and receive in Alcoholics Anonymous. But she got real sick last year and just took a decline out of nowhere. But I got to go in there. My brother's sober also. He came up from California. Him and his wife have both been sober since August 1st, 2010, when he made a phone call to me and I guided him to a meeting for his wife. And so I've just got so many gifts out of this thing. But we go in there every night and I'd read to my mom, and towards the end she would still smile every time I came in there, and that was, I knew she was listening. And she's a big Willie Nelson fan. And here's where I'll go. And I'm like, I know this isn't AA approved literature, but I love reading this because I'd skim through this. It's Willie Nelson's Letters to America. And he writes to everybody, to Jimmy Carter, to Santa Claus, to his parents. And I was reading this to her every night just so she'd hear the sound of my voice. And she was a big Willie Nelson fan. And for some reason, there was one, it's called God is a 4-letter word. And I kept kind of bouncing over that. And I thought, oh, it's going to be Willie Nelson kind of telling a joke. And it says, I'll read just part of it. It says, "Dear God, the universe in which we're born is infinitely large, and each of us is so small. We search for meaning when the meaning is all around us. In every moment of our day, we search for you, God. We always have. We try to give you a form that we can understand. You've always been with me in your many forms. I started in a Methodist church, but found myself at ease with every religion I've tried to understand. I can't tell you now whether I'm a Baptist or a Buddhist. Considering my footwear, maybe I'm just a Buddhist, a boot-wearing man who believes we were put here for a reason, and that by doing our best, we may find the light we seek. If not, our souls are eternal, and perhaps next time around, we'll do better. You spoke to me in the church, and you spoke to me in the fields and in the open pastures. You spoke to me in the songs of the mockingbirds and the blue jays who flew above us. You spoke to me through the rustle of the Texas wind and in the trees through the thunder in the night. And when I paused to listen, you still speak to me. You spoke to me through the music and the guidance from Mama Nelson, who told me God always prevails because good and goodness can never be defeated. I wrote a song for you once called In God's Eyes, but maybe I wrote all those songs for you, just as all those songs were gifts from you. You were with me at the birth of my children and at the passing of my friends. You were with me when I gaze out on the blue bonnets of Texas. You're with me when the rooster crows at dawn. He doesn't sound sweeter than a mockingbird, but try telling the rooster that. I feel you when I marvel and wonder at the brilliant rainbows of Maui, when I sing in the little frontier chapel in Luck, and when I stop for reflection on a quiet weekday in the Methodist church, where Sister Bobby and I first lifted our voices to the heaven. The beauty of this world and the people in it have always been with us. You give us power to see and smell and touch us. We are born of love, and it is love that carries us through. And that was the last thing that I ever read my mother. And I think there's a reason for that. You know, I believe that God is love. Chuck C said that, and Willie Nelson wraps it up too, you know, and when you get two people like that, there's no doubt in my mind that that's the last words my mom heard. And that's exactly what I feel about God. And you guys introduced me to that, and I'm forever grateful. So thank you for letting me share tonight. I'm sorry I ran a little bit over, but I could go on for days about Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a gift. So thank you so much.